Vineyards and mulberry orchards abound in southern Italy. For centuries, farmers cultivated the sunny fields near Mount Vesuvius and reaped rich harvests without digging deeply into the fertile soil. But about 300 years ago, a farmer hired workmen to search for water on his land. As they dug down through layers of volcanic ash and pumice stone, the workmen came across pieces of marble and pottery. Where did they come from? What strange language was this carved into stone tablets? Later, water pots, bowls, and basins were unearthed. Close to the skeleton of a man were found gold and silver coins from the time of Nero. Statues and tablets bore Latin inscriptions and the name of Pompeii, a city which had disappeared 1,700 years before. Was it possible that beneath the wheat fields and vineyards, a city lay buried under volcanic ash? Archaeologists became excited. Perhaps they would find houses, shops, and temples filled with rich treasure. The work of excavation began, and slowly Pompeii emerged. In some cases, roofs had caved in under the weight of stone and ash. Walls had crumbled and broken. But for the most part, excavators found courts, villas, and terraces with graceful statues, just as they were centuries ago in the time of Apostle Paul. As the narrow paved streets were uncovered and the historical records studied, the whole story of Pompeii began to fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. It was an ordinary life story with a sudden and terrible ending. At the beginning of the first century, Pompeii was a flourishing town on the Bay of Naples. By land or sea, it was within easy reach of Rome and was fast becoming a popular resort for senators and merchants from the imperial city. The wealthy Romans were building large country homes called villas, where the rooms encircled open courts and gardens. In the courts, shimmering pools and fountains were set in beautiful mosaic pavements. A short walk from his home took the citizen to the Forum, the heart of the city where all the business was transacted. Here gathered the money changers and the real estate agents. Peddlers and beggars shouted. Loungers played backgammon. Poets recited their verses. Stores which lined the main streets offered merchandise from far and near. There were cleaners and dyers, bakeries and wine shops. Clever artisans worked in metal, leather, and glass. Large bakeries provided most of the bread for Pompeii's 20,000 inhabitants. The grain was crushed in stone grinders turned by donkeys or slaves, while the coarse flour dropped into the rim below. The bread was molded into large, flat cakes and baked in brick ovens. Big pottery jars were sunk into the counter at the wine store or tavern. To serve, the bartender tilted the jar over a wooden block, poured the wine into a mug. So the stores of Pompeii tell us about the trades and occupations of the people. But what were they like? The people who thronged the Stabian Way with its raised stepping stones. Were any of them Christians? Had some of them heard the gospel? Paul had visited the Bay of Naples on his way to Rome, stopping for a week to teach and encourage the Christians at Puteoli, now called Puteoli. Pompeii was only 13 miles distant, and it may be that some went across the bay to hear the apostle preach. They worshipped Greek gods in the temple of Apollo, There were many temples for pagan gods, and we know that the emperors themselves claimed to be divine and demanded the worship of the people. With so many gods, the people were becoming confused and losing interest in the temples. They cared more for food and amusement. They could go to the theaters and see the mimics make fun of the most dignified citizens. But it was the big amphitheater which really drew the crowds. Here they found the excitement and thrills they craved. People came from the surrounding countryside, from the villas and workshops, until the seats around the arena were thronged, the rich on the lower levels and the poor above. Then the gladiators were brought, and the contest began. This was no farce, but a fight to death, man against man, or man against beast, until the sand grew red, while the crowd above shrieked and groaned for more. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their way. When the Apostle Paul wrote those words to Roman Christians, was he thinking of the spectacles in the arenas? Many Christians died in the amphitheaters in Paul's day, for the Romans were afraid of the new teaching which said that all men were equal before God. Did some die at Pompeii? Was the crowd shouting for their blood while the mountain Vesuvius rumbled in the background? A feather of smoke had hung over Vesuvius for days, and there had been shocks and earthquakes for several years, but the people of Pompeii were used to that. In the busy forum, in the villas of the noblemen, along the narrow streets, life went on as usual. And then, suddenly, in August of the year 79, Vesuvius exploded. The top blew away to reveal a terrifying heart of fire. The earth rocked as the mountain rumbled. A heavy black smoke hung over the city. Along the chariot-rutted streets, the people hurried to seek the shelter of their homes or to escape from the city, while down upon them beat a hailstorm of pumice stones, ashes, and dust. The air was thick with acrid fumes. Relentlessly, the ashes fell for 3 days and nights, burying the city and its people. It was not until 1,700 years later that excavators learned the true story of Pompeii's doom and how the busy, thriving city was literally stopped dead in its tracks. Within the barracks of the gladiators, they found skeletons still heavily chained. The captives had no chance to escape, but perhaps death from the mountain was more merciful than death in the arena. Priests were buried in the temples with the pagan gods they served, while nearby lay the gold coins and silver temple vessels that they were seeking to save. In their haste to escape, bakers forgot the bread in their ovens. It was found there, burnt black, but well preserved centuries later. Roman sentries died near their posts at the city gates, with dozens of others who were seeking to escape. Some died on the streets, some in vaults and cellars. The excavators found strange hollows in the hardened ashes. A method was devised of pouring plaster into the hollows. These casts tell the grim story of how the people died. Bodies and faces contorted as they were suffocated by sulfurous fumes and hot, sticky ashes. The dog strained at his collar, but no one remembered to release him. He was held prisoner for death. Was this a wealthy Roman who, like the man in the Bible, could say, "I builded me houses, made gardens and pools, and had great possessions"? Had he read the Hebrew Scriptures, he would have found that one event happeneth to all, for the rich or poor, and when death came, his great possessions would be left behind. These very people once walked the streets of Pompeii. The older ones were alive when Christ was crucified. All except the youngest must have been living when Paul visited the neighboring town. This man may have made the 13-mile trip to hear the apostle. History tells us that Drusilla, a Jewess, perished at Pompeii. In the book of Acts, we read that she and her husband Felix once questioned Paul about faith in Christ and trembled when he talked of righteousness and judgment. But Felix said, "Go thy way. When I have a convenient seat